At Thanksgiving dinner, my son leaned in and whispered, "Mom, are you enjoying my $10,000 payments?" I froze and replied, "Son, I live in a 161 square foot apartment. It's smaller than a one-car garage." That's when my daughter-in-law dropped her plate and lost all the color in her face with the truth. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." The smell of roasted turkey filled my tiny apartment as I carefully arranged the few dishes I could afford on my secondhand table. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday, but this year felt different. My son Randall had actually invited me to their house for dinner, something that hadn't happened in over 3 years. I smoothed down my best dress, a navy blue number I'd worn to church for the past 5 years, and checked my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. At 64, I looked every bit my age, maybe older. The stress of living paycheck to paycheck on my meager Social Security had carved deep lines around my eyes and turned my hair completely gray. The drive to Randall's house in Oakwood Hills always reminded me of how far apart our worlds had become. My beat-up Honda Civic seemed to wheeze as it climbed the winding roads lined with manicured lawns and houses that cost more than I'd make in 10 lifetimes. When I pulled into their circular driveway, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that told me I didn't belong here. Avalon answered the door wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something cold in her blue eyes that made me uncomfortable. "Agatha," she said, her smile not quite reaching those eyes. "You made it." The house smelled like expensive candles and success. Everything was perfectly decorated in neutral tones, beiges and whites that screamed money. I followed Avalon to the dining room, where Randall was carving what looked like the most beautiful turkey I'd ever seen. "Mom!" He came over and hugged me, and for a moment, I felt like maybe things could be normal between us. "I'm so glad you could make it." We sat down to dinner, and I tried to make conversation, asking about Randall's work at the investment firm and Avalon's latest yoga classes. The food was incredible: tender turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, green bean casserole that tasted like it came from a 5-star restaurant. I felt guilty eating so much when I knew I'd be going back to my canned soup and peanut butter sandwiches tomorrow. About halfway through dinner, as Avalon was telling us about some expensive spa weekend she'd just booked, Randall leaned toward me. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and he said something that made my blood turn to ice. "Mom, are you enjoying my $10,000 payments?" I nearly choked on my sweet potato casserole. My fork clattered against my plate as I stared at him in complete shock. $10,000. What was he talking about? "Son," I managed to say, my voice shaking, "I live in a 161 square foot apartment. It's smaller than a one-car garage." The color drained from Randall's face. He looked confused, almost hurt. "What do you mean? I've been sending you $10,000 every month for the past 2 years. Avalon handles the transfers." That's when Avalon dropped her plate. The crash of breaking china echoed through their pristine dining room like a gunshot. Green bean casserole splattered across the white tablecloth, and gravy pooled on the hardwood floor. But what struck me most was the look on her face. Pure terror. She scrambled to clean up the mess, her hands shaking as she gathered the broken pieces. "I'm so clumsy," she laughed, but it sounded forced, artificial. Let me clean this up." Randall was staring at me with wide eyes. "Mom, what do you mean about your apartment? Where have you been living?" My throat felt dry as sandpaper. I took a sip of water, trying to gather my thoughts. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some mistake. "I live in a studio apartment above Murphy's Deli on 5th Street, I said quietly. "The toilet is 3 feet from my bed, and I can touch both walls if I stretch my arms out. I shop at the dollar store and use coupons for everything. Last week, I had to choose between buying groceries or paying for my blood pressure medication." The silence that followed was deafening. Avalon had stopped cleaning and was frozen on her knees beside the table, still clutching pieces of broken plate. Randall looked like someone had slapped him. "But I've been sending," he started, then stopped. His gaze slowly shifted to his wife. "Avalon, you said you were taking care of the transfers. You said Mom was doing well, that she'd moved to a nice place. Avalon's face was completely white now. She stood up slowly, the broken pieces still in her hands. "There must be some confusion," she said, but her voice was barely a whisper. Maybe there was a problem with the bank. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the way she kept fidgeting with her wedding ring, the expensive clothes, the perfect house, the luxury vacations she was always posting about on Facebook. "Avalon," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "What happened to my money?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Randall stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice was louder now, angry. "I've been sending $24,000 a year to take care of my mother, and you're telling me she's living in poverty?" The broken plate pieces fell from Avalon's hands, scattering across the floor like her carefully constructed lies. I sat there in my 5-year-old dress, in their $10,000 dining room, and realized that for 2 years, I'd been living like a pauper while my own daughter-in-law had been stealing from me. While I'd been counting pennies and eating canned ravioli for dinner, she'd been living off money meant to ensure I was comfortable in my golden years. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was knowing that my son thought he'd been taking care of me all this time, while I'd been wondering why he seemed so distant, so unconcerned about my struggles. He thought he was being a good son. He had no idea his wife was intercepting his love and leaving me with nothing. As I watched Avalon's perfect composure crumble, I realized this was only the beginning. If she could steal $24,000 a year and lie about it so easily, what else had she been hiding? The ride home from Randall's house felt like driving through a nightmare. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I replayed the evening over and over in my mind. $48,000. That's how much money should have made its way to me over the past 2 years. Instead, I'd been living off $900 a month in Social Security, skipping meals and rationing my medication. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Avalon's face when she dropped that plate. The terror in her eyes wasn't just about being caught in a lie. It was the look of someone whose entire world was about to collapse. The next morning, I called Randall. My hands shook as I dialed his number, not knowing what to expect. "Mom." His voice was heavy with exhaustion. "I'm so sorry. I don't understand what happened, but I'm going to figure this out." "What did Avalon say?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. There was a long pause. "She said there were complications with the transfers, that she was keeping the money in a special account for emergencies, and she was taking care of your needs directly. She showed me receipts for groceries, utilities, even medical expenses." My stomach dropped. "Randall, I haven't seen a penny of that money. And I certainly haven't had anyone paying my bills." Another pause, longer this time. "I know, Mom. I know that now. I'm going to the bank today to see exactly where that money went." That afternoon, Randall called me back. His voice was tight with anger. "Mom, you need to sit down for this." I was already sitting in my tiny kitchen, staring out at the brick wall that served as my view, but I gripped the phone tighter. The money went into a joint account that Avalon opened. She's been withdrawing it regularly. Last month alone, she spent $3,000 at Nordstrom, $1,500 at a spa in downtown, and $2,000 on what the bank statement calls home improvements. The room started spinning. I pressed my free hand against my forehead, trying to process what he was telling me. "She's been using your money to live like a queen while you've been struggling to survive," Randall continued, his voice breaking. "Mom, I thought I was taking care of you. I thought you were comfortable. When you never called to thank me, I figured you were just being independent, not wanting to make a big deal about it." That's when the pieces really started falling into place. All those times I'd wondered why Randall seemed so distant, so unconcerned about my living situation. All those family gatherings I wasn't invited to, all those phone calls that went unreturned. He thought he was already doing his part. He thought I was ungrateful. "There's more, Mom." His voice got quieter. I looked back through 2 years of statements. She's been systematic about it. Regular transfers to her personal accounts, cash withdrawals, payments to stores I know you'd never shop at, and there are charges for things like designer purses, expensive restaurants, even a weekend trip to Napa Valley that she told me her sister paid for. I felt sick. While I'd been choosing between buying groceries and filling my prescription, Avalon had been living it up on money meant to keep me from exactly that kind of desperation. But here's the thing that really gets me, Randall said. She's been intercepting more than just the money transfers. I found emails in her computer, emails I sent you that were forwarded to an account she controls. She's been reading our correspondence and filtering what gets through to you. My breath caught. What do you mean? Remember your birthday 3 months ago? I sent you a card with $500 cash and called twice. You never responded, so I figured you were upset with me about something. But I found copies of emails where she contacted the post office and had your mail forwarded to a P.O. box she controls. She's been intercepting everything. The walls of my tiny apartment seemed to close in around me. She hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen my relationship with my son. She'd created a barrier between us, making him think I was ungrateful and making me think he didn't care. That Christmas gift I thought you never sent, I whispered, remembering how hurt I'd been when December 25th came and went with nothing from Randall. I sent a tablet and a gift card for groceries, $800 worth. Avalon signed for the delivery. I had to put the phone down for a minute. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated. This wasn't just theft. It was psychological warfare. She'd systematically destroyed my relationship with my son while enriching herself with money meant to help me survive. When I picked the phone back up, Randall was still talking. I confronted her this morning. She broke down crying, said she was just trying to help, that she thought she knew better how to manage money than you did. She claimed she was saving it all for your future care, in case you got sick or needed nursing home care. And what did you say? I told her to show me the savings account where she was keeping this money for your care. His laugh was bitter. Of course there isn't one. Every penny is gone. Spent on her lifestyle while my mother was eating dollar store soup for dinner. I closed my eyes, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what she'd done. But underneath the hurt and anger, something else was growing. A cold, determined fury. What happens now? I asked. Now? Now I'm filing for divorce. And I'm going to make sure she pays back every cent she stole from you, plus interest. I've already moved the remaining money in our joint accounts to a separate account she can't touch. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the past 2 years. The shame I'd felt when I couldn't afford Christmas gifts for Randall, the loneliness when he seemed to drift away from me, the fear when I opened my mailbox to find only bills and no word from my only child. All of it orchestrated by a woman who smiled to my face while systematically destroying my life. But I wasn't the same broken woman who'd been living in shadows. Knowing the truth changed something fundamental inside me. I wasn't a burden my son was reluctantly supporting. I wasn't forgotten or unloved. I was a victim of theft and manipulation, but I was also a survivor. And Avalon had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to expose Avalon immediately, not yet. After 37 years of marriage to a man who taught me patience through pain, and 36 years of raising a son mostly on my own, I'd learned something valuable about timing. Sometimes the most powerful move is the one nobody sees coming. Instead of demanding justice right away, I decided to watch. To really see who Avalon was when she thought she was safe. 3 days after the Thanksgiving disaster, she called me. Her voice was honey-sweet, the way it always was when she wanted something. Agatha, I feel just terrible about the confusion the other night. I think there's been a banking error, and I want to help sort it all out. I sat in my threadbare armchair, looking around my cramped apartment, and chose my words carefully. That's very kind of you, dear. I was thinking we could meet for lunch tomorrow. There's this lovely little cafe downtown, Le Bernardin. Do you know it? Of course I knew it. It was the most expensive restaurant in the city, where entrees started at $45. The irony wasn't lost on me. She wanted to discuss my stolen money at a place I could never afford, probably planning to pay with my own funds. I'm not sure I can afford— Oh, don't be silly. My treat, of course. Your treat, using money that was meant to keep me from choosing between food and medicine. All right, I said. What time? The next day, I borrowed my neighbor Mrs. Chen's car and drove to Le Bernardin. I'd never been inside a place so fancy. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and each table had more silverware than I owned in total. I felt completely out of place in my discount store outfit, but I held my head high. Avalon was already there, wearing a designer dress I now knew cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She waved me over with a bright smile, like we were old friends meeting for a casual chat. "You look wonderful," she lied smoothly, air-kissing my cheek. "I ordered us some wine. I hope you don't mind. It's this amazing Chardonnay from Napa Valley." The wine probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. I took a small sip and listened as she launched into her performance. "I feel so terrible about this whole misunderstanding," she said, dabbing at her eyes with her cloth napkin. "You have to understand, Agatha. I was only trying to help. Randall was so worried about you, and I thought if I managed the money carefully, I could make sure it was there when you really needed it." She paused, watching my face for a reaction. When I didn't give her one, she continued, "I know it looks bad, but I was putting most of it aside in a special high-yield savings account. The receipts Randall saw were just for immediate necessities. I wanted to surprise you both with how much I'd saved." I nodded, taking another sip of wine. "That was thoughtful of you." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She thought I was buying it. "The thing is," she continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "I may have mixed up some of the accounts. You know how confusing banking can be for us women, but I'm going to straighten it all out. I promise. Us women. As if being female automatically made us incompetent with money. I'd balanced my own checkbook for 40 years, stretching every dollar to make ends meet while she'd been living off stolen funds. "I'm sure you will," I said calmly. Over the next hour, I listened to an increasingly elaborate web of lies. According to Avalon, there had been banking errors, computer glitches, and a series of unfortunate miscommunications. She painted herself as the victim of circumstance, the well-meaning daughter-in-law who'd gotten in over her head trying to help. What struck me most wasn't the creativity of her lies. It was how easily they came to her. She didn't hesitate, didn't stumble over details. This wasn't panic-induced dishonesty. This was the smooth, practiced deception of someone who'd been lying for a very long time. As she talked, I found myself studying her like a specimen under a microscope. The way she touched her throat when she lied about the savings account. How her voice got slightly higher when she claimed the Nordstrom purchases were gifts for you that I was saving for your birthday. The way she avoided eye contact when she said she'd never meant for any confusion to happen. By the time our $120 lunch was over, I had a complete picture of who I was dealing with. This wasn't just a woman who'd made some poor choices. This was a predator who'd identified me as easy prey and had been systematically feeding off me for 2 years. But she'd made one crucial error. She'd underestimated her victim. That evening, I called Randall, but not to report on lunch. Instead, I asked him something that had been bothering me. "Son, in the past 2 years, how many times did Avalon tell you I was doing well? That I was happy with my living situation?" There was a pause. "A lot, actually. Whenever I asked about you, she always had updates. She said you loved your new apartment, that you'd made friends in the building, that you were taking art classes at the senior center." Art classes. I'd inquired about them once, but couldn't afford the $15 registration fee. Did she ever suggest that maybe I didn't want to be bothered? That I was enjoying my independence? "Yeah," Randall said slowly. "She said you'd specifically asked not to be treated like you were helpless, that you wanted to handle things yourself and would ask for help if you needed it." Perfect. She'd created a narrative where my silence was preference, not abandonment, where my lack of contact was choice, not isolation. "One more question. When's the last time you tried to visit me at my apartment?" "I didn't know your address," he admitted. "Avalon said you wanted to keep your location private for safety reasons, since it was in a rough neighborhood. She said she'd arrange visits when you were ready." The manipulation was so complete, so thorough. She'd built a wall between us brick by brick, making sure neither of us could reach the other without going through her first. Over the following weeks, I began documenting everything. I kept a journal of our conversations, noting each lie, each manipulation. I started paying attention to her social media posts, screenshotting the expensive purchases and exotic trips that were funded by my stolen money. But more importantly, I began to see patterns in how she operated. Avalon was a creature of habit. She lied the same way every time, with tears, with claims of good intentions, with just enough truth mixed in to make the lies seem plausible. She also had a fatal flaw: arrogance. She was so convinced of her own cleverness, so certain that she could manipulate everyone around her, that she'd gotten careless. The evidence of her theft wasn't just in bank statements. It was everywhere, if you knew how to look. 2 weeks before Christmas, she made her next move. She called to invite me to their annual holiday party. "I know things have been awkward," she said, "but it's Christmas and family should be together. Plus, I have some wonderful news about that savings account I mentioned." Of course she did. She'd had weeks to prepare her next lie. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And Agatha? Maybe don't mention our little lunch conversation to anyone at the party. You know how people love to gossip, and I'd hate for anyone to get the wrong idea about our family." Our family. She still thought she could control the narrative. "Of course, dear. I wouldn't want to cause any problems." As I hung up the phone, I realized something had shifted inside me over these weeks of watching and waiting. The frightened, ashamed woman who'd been living in this tiny apartment was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Avalon thought she was inviting a harmless old lady to her Christmas party. She was wrong. The Christmas party was everything I expected from Avalon: excessive, showy, and paid for with money that should have been keeping me warm and fed. Their house blazed with enough lights to illuminate a small town, and inside, everything sparkled with the kind of holiday decorations that cost more than most people's cars. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best dress, the same navy one from Thanksgiving, but I'd managed to find a festive scarf at the dollar store. Among the guests in their designer outfits, I looked exactly like what I was, the poor relative invited out of obligation. Perfect. Avalon swept over to greet me, wearing a red cocktail dress that I now recognized from her social media posts. The caption had read, "Treating myself to something special for the holidays." What she'd really meant was, spending Agatha's money on another outfit she'll never be able to afford. "Agatha, you look lovely," she gushed, though her eyes said otherwise. "Come, let me introduce you to everyone." She paraded me around like a trophy, the sweet mother-in-law she was so generously caring for. I smiled and nodded, playing my part perfectly, but all the while I was listening, watching, learning. "This is Randall's mother," she told each group of guests. "She's such an inspiration, living independently, refusing all offers of help, so proud and self-sufficient." The guests nodded approvingly at this heartwarming tale of elderly independence, never guessing that my pride was actually poverty and my self-sufficiency was abandonment. About an hour into the party, Avalon pulled me aside. Her cheeks were flushed from champagne and the excitement of being the center of attention. "I have that wonderful news I mentioned," she said, her voice pitched low and confidential. "I've been working with the bank to sort out those account mix-ups, and I think I've found most of your money. Most of it, not all of it." She was already preparing to explain away the thousands she'd stolen. "That's wonderful, dear," I said. "How much were you able to recover?" Her smile flickered slightly. "Well, there were some administrative fees, and the bank had to deduct penalties for the account errors. But I think we saved about $30,000. $30,000. Out of the $48,000 that should have been mine. She was planning to keep $18,000 and present the return of the rest as a generous gift. "That's such a relief," I said. "I was getting worried about my emergency fund." "Your emergency fund?" She repeated, her perfectly contoured eyebrows drawing together. "Oh yes, the money I've been saving for emergencies. You know, in case I need medical care or have to move to assisted living. I've been so careful with every penny, putting aside what I can each month. It's not much, but it's taken me years to save $15,000. I watched her face carefully as I delivered this fabrication. Her expression shifted from confusion to something closer to panic. $15,000? She said. Where do you keep that money?" "In a special account, of course. The same bank where you've been managing my other funds. I was hoping you could help me consolidate everything once you get this sorted out." The color drained from her face. She was doing the math, realizing that if I had $15,000 in savings that she didn't know about, it would be impossible to explain away the missing money from Randall's transfers. I didn't realize you had other accounts, she stammered. Oh, I've always been very careful about money, I said with a smile. Growing up poor teaches you to plan for the worst. I have copies of all my bank statements and transaction records. I keep everything organized in a file box. Would you like me to bring them over so we can compare notes? She looked like she was going to be sick. That won't be necessary, she said quickly. I'm sure we can figure everything out without all that paperwork. But I wasn't done. Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something else. I've been having trouble accessing my emergency fund lately. The bank keeps asking for additional identification, and you know how confusing all that technology can be for someone my age. This was completely false, of course. I didn't have $15,000. I barely had $1,500, but Avalon didn't know that. What kind of trouble? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, when I try to withdraw money, they say the account has been flagged for unusual activity. Something about large transfers that don't match my usual spending patterns. They want me to come in with documentation proving that I authorized all the recent transactions. Avalon's champagne glass trembled in her hand. Recent transactions. Yes, apparently there have been several large withdrawals over the past few months. The bank representative was very concerned. She said it looked like someone might be accessing my account without permission. I paused, letting this sink in. She suggested I file a police report. No! The word came out sharper than she'd intended. Several party guests turned to look at us. Avalon forced a smile and lowered her voice. I mean, there's no need for that. I'm sure it's just another banking error. These computer systems are so unreliable. But the bank representative seemed very concerned, I pressed. She said elderly financial abuse is a serious crime, and they have special investigators who handle these cases. She even gave me a direct phone number to call if I suspected someone was stealing from me. Avalon set down her champagne glass with shaking hands. Agatha, you're not suggesting that someone in the family would. I mean, that's impossible. We all love you. Oh, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, I said innocently. But the bank representative was very thorough. She said they can track every transaction, every login, every transfer. She said even if someone thought they were being clever, the digital footprints always lead back to the source. This was partially true. Banks do track transactions. But I'd never spoken to any bank representative about fraud. Everything I was saying was designed to make Avalon believe that her theft was about to be exposed by people far more powerful and relentless than she was. Maybe we should discuss this privately, she said, glancing around nervously at the other guests. Oh, there's no rush, I said brightly. The bank representative said I should take my time gathering all the documentation. She wants copies of every statement, every canceled check, every receipt. She said the more evidence I can provide, the stronger the case will be. Case? Avalon's voice was barely audible. The fraud case, dear. She said that's what they call it when someone steals money from elderly people. She was very reassuring. Said they prosecute these cases aggressively because seniors are considered a vulnerable population. I watched as Avalon processed this information. She was trapped between the lie she'd told Randall about having my money in a special account and the new lie she was planning about bank errors eating away at the total. Now she thought I had additional money that could expose the scope of her theft, and she believed the authorities were already investigating. Excuse me, she said suddenly. I need to use the restroom. As she hurried away, I helped myself to another glass of champagne from a passing server. Around me, the party continued in full swing. Guests laughed and chatted, completely unaware that their hostess's perfect world was crumbling. Randall appeared at my side, looking handsome in his dark suit. Mom, you seem different tonight. More confident. Do I? I smiled at my son. Maybe it's the Christmas spirit. Avalon seems stressed. She's been acting strange all week, actually. Ever since Thanksgiving. The holidays can be overwhelming, I said. All that pressure to make everything perfect. What I didn't tell him was that Avalon wasn't stressed about the holidays. She was stressed about the trap that was slowly closing around her. Every lie she'd told was becoming harder to maintain, every manipulation more difficult to sustain. When she returned from the restroom, her perfect makeup had been touched up, but I could see the fear still lurking in her eyes. Agatha, she said, pulling me aside again. About that emergency fund of yours. Maybe we could handle that privately, without involving the bank's fraud investigators. But they're just trying to protect me, I said. Don't you think I should cooperate with their investigation? It's just that these investigations can be so disruptive. They might freeze all your accounts while they're looking into things. You could be left without access to any of your money for months. Now she was threatening me, trying to scare me into silence. But I wasn't the frightened woman she'd been stealing from anymore. Well, I said thoughtfully, I suppose if all my money was properly accounted for, there wouldn't be anything for them to investigate, would there? The look she gave me was pure hatred, quickly masked by her practiced smile. She finally understood what was happening. The prey had become the hunter. The week between Christmas and New Year's was torture for Avalon. I could tell because she called me every single day, each conversation more desperate than the last. She'd gone from confident manipulator to barely controlled panic, and I was savoring every moment of her downward spiral. Agatha, I've been thinking about your situation with the bank, she said during one of these calls. Maybe it would be better if we didn't mention anything to Randall until everything is sorted out. You know how he worries. But he's been so concerned about my finances, I replied sweetly. I think he'd want to know about any problems. It's just that he's been under so much stress at work. I hate to add to his burden with banking errors and investigations. Banking errors. She was still clinging to that story, even though we both knew the truth. On New Year's Eve, Randall called me with an invitation I'd been hoping for. Mom, why don't you come over tonight? We're having a quiet celebration, just the three of us. Avalon's making her famous beef Wellington. Her famous beef Wellington that probably cost $80 and was paid for with my stolen money. But I accepted graciously. I arrived at their house at 7 o'clock, carrying a bottle of cheap champagne I'd bought with quarters and dollar bills. Inside, I could smell the expensive meal cooking, and I noticed Avalon had opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She greeted me with a hug that felt more like a desperate clutch. Agatha, you look wonderful. Come sit down. Let me get you some wine. Randall was in good spirits, talking about his plans for the new year, completely unaware of the tension crackling between his wife and his mother. During dinner, I waited for the right moment to begin my final move. It came when Randall started talking about his New Year's resolution to be more financially responsible. I've been looking over all our accounts, he said, cutting into his Wellington, making sure everything is organized and accounted for. It's amazing how money can just slip away if you're not careful. Avalon's fork clattered against her plate. That sounds very wise, I said. I've been doing the same thing with my accounts, making sure every penny is accounted for. Randall looked up with interest. Really? I thought you didn't like dealing with financial paperwork. Oh, I've learned to be much more careful about money over the years, I said, especially since I've been having those problems with the bank that Avalon mentioned. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for weeks. Randall frowned. Problems with the bank? What problems? Avalon shot me a desperate look, but I ignored her. The bank contacted me about some unusual activity on my accounts, large transactions that don't match my spending patterns. What kind of transactions? Randall asked, setting down his fork. I pulled out a small notebook from my purse, a prop I'd prepared for this moment. Well, according to their records, there have been numerous large withdrawals and transfers over the past 2 years. The amounts don't make sense for someone living on my income. Randall's expression grew serious. Mom, are you saying someone has been accessing your accounts without permission? The bank seems to think so, I said. They've been very thorough in their investigation. They can trace every transaction, every login, every transfer. They even know which computer and IP address was used for online banking. Avalon had gone completely white. She was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. But here's the strange part, I continued, opening my notebook and pretending to read from it. According to the bank's records, most of these suspicious transactions correspond exactly with dates when money was supposed to be transferred to help with my living expenses. Randall sat back in his chair, the pieces starting to fall into place. You mean the money I've been sending? It seems that way. The bank investigator said it looks like someone was intercepting those transfers and redirecting them to other accounts. I looked directly at Avalon. She said whoever did this was very clever about it. They made it look like the money was going where it was supposed to go, but then they moved it somewhere else. The silence that followed was deafening. Randall's gaze moved slowly from me to his wife. Avalon was staring at her plate, tears starting to stream down her face. "Avalon," Randall said quietly, "is there something you want to tell me?" She looked up, mascara running, her perfect facade finally cracking completely. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me." "I was trying to help," she sobbed. "Your mother doesn't understand money. She would have just wasted it." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Randall's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, realization, and finally, cold fury. "Wasted it on what?" he asked. "Food? Medicine? Rent?" "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," Avalon continued as if she were the victim. "Maintaining this house, keeping up appearances for your career. Your mother was fine living simply. She didn't need all that money. She was eating canned soup and rationing her medication." Randall's voice rose. "While you were buying $1,000 purses and taking spa vacations." "It wasn't like that," Avalon insisted. "I was planning to give it back. I was investing it, making it grow. You thought you'd steal from my mother and lie to both of us about it." Randall stood up so abruptly his chair fell over. "For 2 years, Mom. 2 years. I thought I was taking care of you. I thought you were comfortable and happy. Do you know how guilty I felt when you seemed distant? I thought you were disappointed in me for not visiting enough." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I never blamed you, son. I thought you'd simply moved on with your life. I thought you didn't need your old mother anymore. And you," he turned to Avalon, his voice shaking with rage, "you let me believe my mother was ungrateful. You told me she didn't appreciate what I was doing for her. You made me feel like I was wasting my money on someone who didn't care." Avalon was sobbing now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity, the crying of someone who'd been caught and was facing consequences for the first time in her life. "All those times I asked you about Mom's situation and you told me she was fine. All those suggestions you made that maybe I was being too generous, that maybe she was taking advantage of my guilt. You were projecting your own behavior onto her." "Randall, please," she begged. "We can work this out. I'll pay it all back." "With what money?" he asked coldly. "Every penny you've spent was stolen from my mother. The clothes you're wearing, the food we just ate. Probably this entire house payment has been subsidized by money meant to keep my mother from poverty." He turned to me, his eyes filled with shame and pain. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I failed you completely." "No," I said firmly. "You didn't fail me. You were lied to and manipulated by someone you trusted. That's not failure. That's betrayal." Avalon tried one last desperate play. "Agatha, tell him this is all a misunderstanding. Tell him about the savings account we discussed." But I was done protecting her feelings and done enabling her lies. "There is no savings account," I said calmly. "There never was. You stole $48,000 from me over 2 years while I lived in a studio apartment smaller than your closet. You intercepted gifts, cards, and letters from my son. You systematically destroyed our relationship while enriching yourself with money meant to ensure I could live with dignity in my old age." The full weight of what she'd done settled over the room. Randall sank back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. "I trusted you with the most important thing in my life, taking care of my mother, and you used that trust to hurt her and steal from her." Avalon's sobs grew louder, but no one comforted her. She'd burned that bridge completely. "I want you out of this house," Randall said, his voice eerily calm. "Tonight, take whatever you can carry, but remember, everything else was paid for with stolen money." As Avalon stumbled upstairs to pack, Randall and I sat in the ruins of what had been their perfect dining room. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you figure out what she was doing?" I smiled, thinking of all those weeks of careful planning and patient observation. She underestimated me. She thought because I was poor and old that I was also stupid. But surviving on $900 a month for 2 years taught me to pay attention to every detail. And when someone is lying to you, if you watch carefully enough, they always give themselves away. The truth was finally out. Now came the reckoning. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, a real one-bedroom with actual walls between the rooms, making coffee in a machine that didn't require quarters. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that faced a garden instead of a brick wall, and for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: peace. The legal proceedings had moved faster than I'd expected. Avalon's lawyer had advised her to cooperate fully, hoping for leniency. She'd signed over the deed to several pieces of jewelry, including a diamond necklace worth $8,000 that she'd bought with my stolen money. Her designer wardrobe was sold, her car repossessed, and the contents of her personal account seized. But the most satisfying moment wasn't financial. It was the day she had to face what she'd really done. The divorce proceedings required full financial disclosure. Randall's lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Martinez, had forensically dissected every transaction from the past 3 years. The scope of Avalon's theft was breathtaking in its audacity and systematic cruelty. She didn't just steal money, Rebecca had explained to us during one of our meetings. She created an elaborate psychological barrier between you and your son. She intercepted birthday cards with cash, Christmas gifts, even get-well cards when you had the flu. She returned packages to senders and redirected mail. This wasn't just financial abuse, it was emotional terrorism. The evidence was overwhelming. Credit card statements showing $1,000 shopping sprees on the same days. I was counting coins for groceries. Spa treatments scheduled for the afternoons when she told Randall she was checking on Agatha. Vacation bookings paid for with money that was supposed to cover my rent and medication. But perhaps most damning were the emails Rebecca's team recovered from Avalon's deleted files. Communications with her sister and friends where she laughed about the old woman's situation and bragged about how easy it was to manipulate both of them. In one particularly vicious email to her sister, she'd written, "Randall thinks he's such a good son, sending mommy money every month. If only he knew she's living like a church mouse while I'm living like a queen. The old bat is too proud to complain and too stupid to figure out where her money is really going." Reading those words in the lawyer's office, I'd felt something shift inside me. The last traces of guilt or sympathy I might have harbored for Avalon evaporated completely. She hadn't just stolen from me. She'd enjoyed it. The financial restitution took time to arrange, but eventually, I received $42,000, most of what she'd stolen, minus legal fees, and the portions that were completely unrecoverable. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to change my life completely. I moved out of my studio apartment above Murphy's Deli and into a proper one-bedroom in a building with other seniors who became friends instead of just neighbors. I could afford fresh groceries, name-brand medication, and even small luxuries like cable television and a smartphone so Randall could call me whenever he wanted. But the real transformation was in my relationship with my son. Those barriers Avalon had so carefully constructed were gone, and for the first time in years, Randall and I could simply be mother and son again. He visited every Sunday now, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. We talked about everything: his work, his dreams, his regrets about the lost years when he thought I was ungrateful for his help. "I should have known," he said one evening as we sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset. "I should have visited you, seen your living conditions with my own eyes." "You trusted your wife," I replied. "That's not a character flaw. That's what marriage is supposed to be built on. But I let her convince me that you were distant, that you didn't want to be bothered. I stopped trying to connect with you because she made me believe you didn't want me to." I reached over and patted his hand. We both learned something valuable. Trust has to be earned and verified. Love doesn't mean blind faith. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in April. Avalon left town immediately afterward, moving back to her mother's house in another state. She'd lost everything: her marriage, her home, her social standing, and her carefully constructed identity as the perfect wife. But I wasn't finished with her yet. 3 weeks after the divorce was final, I received a phone call that made me smile in a way that probably wasn't entirely Christian. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Detective Martinez with the Economic Crimes Unit. We've received your complaint about financial elder abuse, and we'd like to move forward with criminal charges. I'd debated whether to pursue criminal prosecution. The civil case had recovered most of my money and ended Avalon's marriage. Part of me wanted to simply move on with my new life. But then I remembered all those other elderly people who might become her next victims. Predators like Avalon don't stop. They just find new prey. Yes, I told the detective. I want to press charges. The criminal case was different from the civil proceedings. This wasn't about money. It was about justice. Avalon was charged with elder abuse, fraud, and theft. The prosecutor, a young woman who specialized in crimes against seniors, was thorough and relentless. These cases matter, she told me. People like your daughter-in-law count on their victims being too ashamed or too isolated to fight back. When we prosecute successfully, it sends a message that preying on seniors has real consequences. Avalon tried to plea bargain, offering to pay additional restitution in exchange for reduced charges. But the evidence was too strong, and her crimes too systematic. In September, exactly 10 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, she was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 3 years of probation. I attended the sentencing hearing. I wanted to look her in the eye one more time and see if she showed any genuine remorse. She didn't. Even in her orange jumpsuit, even facing prison time, Avalon's main emotion seemed to be self-pity. She cried during her statement to the judge, but her words were all about how the divorce and prosecution had ruined her life, how she'd lost everything, how she was sorry people misunderstood her intentions. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she acknowledge the 2 years of poverty, loneliness, and fear she'd caused me. To the end, she was the victim in her own mind, but I wasn't there for her apology. I was there for my own sense of closure. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up slowly, my voice steady and clear. Your Honor, the defendant didn't just steal money from me. She stole 2 years of my relationship with my son. She stole my dignity, my security, and my trust in family. But most importantly, she tried to steal my voice. I turned to look directly at Avalon for the first time since the proceedings began. She counted on me being too ashamed, too weak, or too afraid to fight back. She was wrong. I may be 65 years old and I may live on Social Security, but I am not powerless. I am not invisible, and I am not done living my life on my own terms. As I walked out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my own power. That evening, Randall took me out to dinner at Le Bernardin, the same expensive restaurant where Avalon had tried to manipulate me with her lies about banking errors. But this time, we were celebrating. My son was buying dinner with his own honestly earned money, and I was there as his honored guest, not a victim of his wife's charity. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass of wine. To family, I replied. The real kind. As we clinked glasses, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, frightened, isolated, counting pennies and wondering why her son seemed so distant. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that being underestimated could be a strength, that patience could be a weapon, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be silenced. I was 65 years old, and I was just getting started. Outside the restaurant windows, the city sparkled with possibilities. Somewhere out there, Avalon was beginning her prison sentence, finally facing real consequences for the first time in her privileged life. But I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow, and next week, and all the years ahead that were finally, truly mine. The girl who'd grown up poor and married young, who'd raised a son mostly alone and survived on scraps for too long, had found her voice at last, and she wasn't done using it. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.